Capitalism is very simple. The owners of all businesses are private individuals, supply and demand are used to set prices in markets, and profit is the driving force of the system. For centuries, we have been told by the establishment that capitalism is the final peak of human evolution, and all we have left to figure out is to tweak the dials. But what if our current economic system of capitalism is not the only option? What else is available to us? Let's explore the alternatives economic systems. Social democracy, the Nordic model, is the tip of the iceberg because it is not anti-capitalist, but rather pro-capitalist, with heavy-duty shock absorbers. The mechanics are simple. Private property, free markets, and corporate profits are 100% legal and very much protected by law. However, the government will impose huge, progressive taxes on these businesses and individuals, sometimes up to 50 to 60% plus on high earners. This taxed capital goes directly into massive, non-market public services. It funds universal healthcare, free education, and subsidized childcare, etc. In this way, capitalism generates a large amount of wealth for the government in order to build this safety net. Therefore, for this system to work, companies need to be very profitable. If you look down just a little bit further, you will come across what is known as democratic socialism. There are a lot of people who confuse this with social democracy, and I will tell you, they're nothing close to being the same. While the Nordic model uses capitalism as the underlying operating system, the socialist model aims to completely break from this system. In the democratic socialist model, many of today's greatest industries, including banking, energy administration, housing development, and transportation, would be removed from the private sector and assumed by the public sector. Moreover, the Soviet Union's authoritarian one-party state philosophy would not be part of the democratic socialist vision. A full-fledged democracy will be established as the mechanism for deciding the nation's economic goals. The current profit motive of private industry will be replaced with public utility as the primary driving force in moving forward in the economy. As we wade into the shallow end, we can discover and learn about market socialism. Imagine a society where there is no Wall Street, where there are no venture capitalists, and where there are no privately owned stockholders. Yet, the grocery stores, tech companies, and auto manufacturers can compete with one another in an unrestricted competitive market. This can happen through worker cooperatives. In a market socialist economy, when you are hired by a company, it legally makes you an equal co-owner. You receive one vote to elect your managers and to set a limit on executive salaries, as well as vote on how to distribute the company's profits at the end of each year. If the company is profitable, all workers will receive a cash distribution from the profits. If the company is unprofitable, all workers will absorb the loss. Market socialism retains the speed of market capitalism, while, at the same time, eliminating the billionaire investor class. One of the main obstacles in developing co-ops is that it is very difficult to raise capital quickly. Since there are no stocks to sell, co-ops depend entirely on bank loans to finance their growth. The third type of system we will explore is distributism, which became popularized as a way to get beyond capitalist and socialism by men like G.K. Chesterton in the early 20th century. Thinkers who endorse distributism look at our world and state. The problem with capitalism is not that there are too many capitalists. The problem is that there are too few. Distributists strongly oppose corporate monopolies and large government as the two sides of the same coin. Mechanically, distributism uses strict antitrust legislation and local property laws to ensure that the means of production are distributed as widely as possible. Rather than millions of individuals working for three huge tech or retail companies, there will be a societal movement towards small, independent family businesses, local guilds, and small-scale family farming. Therefore, all individuals will be economically self-sufficient. Such an approach eliminates labor exploitation, resulting in almost everyone being their own boss. However, critics argue that it would be difficult to build complex capital-intensive technology, such as commercial aircraft and semiconductor chips. As we enter the depths of the ocean, the concepts of money, price, and business structure vanish. Welcome to Participatory Economics, or PERICON for short. PERICON is a total substitute to both capitalism and Soviet communism and has no markets and no central government. Instead, the entire system runs on very complex networks of consumer and worker councils. Each fall, consumer councils create an annual list of everything they expect to need as a consumer next year: food, clothes, power, entertainment, etc. At the same time, every workplace council creates proposals that detail what they will produce and what they need to produce it. A very large, decentralized computer algorithm takes millions of proposals and highlights the imbalances between supply and demand. Then, multiple rounds of changes to the proposals take place between consumer and worker councils until supply and demand are perfectly matched. This removes all corporate greed and manipulation from the advertising process. However, many critics have pointed to the massive amount of paperwork and meetings needed to buy a box of cereal as a major flaw in this process. The shared idea behind mutualism, as an economic theory originating from Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, is about creating a free market where goods can be bought and sold based entirely upon the labor service that created them, that is, the labor theory of value. Thus, in a mutualist economy, private property has been changed to the concept of possession. You possess property, a house, a piece of land, a machine, only if you occupy and use it. If you leave a building vacant and rent it out, you lose your legal claim to that property. You cannot be a landlord. In addition, goods are bought and sold using labor notes. For example, if you made a pair of boots that took 5 hours to construct with your skilled labor, you would trade that pair of boots for something else that took another 5 hours of skilled labor. Financing is provided through a decentralized non-profit organization called the People's Bank. The People's Bank will provide workers/laborers with interest-free loans, allowing access to the tools necessary for production without falling into a debt trap. We're entering a surreal realm in which economists more often model human society as the realm of discussion politics, rather than simply a practical development and data transportation concern. This is called cyber-socialism, as seen within the boundaries of the ultimate expression in the case of 1970s Chile, known as Project Cybersyn. Prior to the creation of what we now describe as the Internet, the Chilean government connected each of many state-owned manufacturing facilities directly to a mainframe computer located in Santiago via an extensive array of telex machines and telephone lines. Each production facility was then required to send daily transmissions in real time, as they occurred, to that mainframe computer, transmitting information regarding their production output, raw material inventories, labor shortages, etc. Cybersyn had custom software that was programmed to process this information, predict future economic congestion, or supply chain failures. For example, if a production facility were out of coal, several days before they occurred, simply through statistical forecasting based on data retrieved from each production site. Therefore, if a factory ran out of coal when they placed an order for coal, it would trigger a notification in the system so that resources could be quickly redirected to fulfill that order. Cybersyn was a completely functional, real-time cybernetic nervous system for a country and provided a means by which economic stability could be maintained despite the country experiencing crippling political strikes in the early 1970s. Moreover, Cybersyn provided proof, though theoretical, that technology could in fact take the place of the market's invisible hand, until the project was abruptly and violently terminated by a military coup in 1973. To the side of that is the gift economy, a fundamentally different way of viewing our own nature. This type of economy has existed for thousands of years in many indigenous populations around the world and involves no exchange of money, barter, or contract. Mechanically speaking, goods and services are given away with no expectation of being paid back immediately. While some may call it altruistic, it is in fact a very complex social credit system. In a gift economy, your position in society, your power and influence, and the safety net supplied by your community is not created by how much wealth you have hoarded, but rather how much wealth you have shared. Those who are most respected and powerful in the community are the ones who have shared the greatest amount of wealth with the overall community. Those who accumulate private wealth, while others do not, are viewed as mentally and emotionally unhealthy. The gift economy has great social cohesion, but has a massive issue on scaling because of reliance on interpersonal relationships, making it increasingly difficult for larger beings, over several hundred, to function effectively. At the absolute bottom of the abyss, you have the organization that wants to completely destroy our existing reality, agorism, a revolutionary libertarian strategy that completely eschews traditional politics. Agorists think that trying to change the economy via voting, protesting, or legislation is a trap. Instead, the agorists are using counter-economics as their means to achieve a totally stateless, free market society through the complete movement of all economic transactions into the unregulated black and gray markets. Through untaxed cash exchange, direct barter, decentralized cryptography, and underground manufacturing, they create a parallel economy that bypasses the state entirely. As the counter-economy grows, the state's funding dries and law enforcement naturally dissolves, leaving a pure, voluntary market in its wake. At last, we come to anti-work, or post-left anarchism. This philosophy takes the concept of communism and travels even further to define the root cause of all human suffering to be not just the exploitation of workers by bosses, but also the very notion of work. Society must be reorganized into one where there are no longer fixed labor days, job descriptions, quotas, or other metrics used to measure progress and production in society. Instead, communities would work together as creative play, whereby necessary tasks would be automated through robotics or completed communally through highly voluntary and rotating work projects. The central consideration for human existence would become the pursuit of passion, leisure, art, and free play, with production being an incidental byproduct of self-expression. As such, this may seem like an impossible ideal in the modern world. However, it is the antithesis of the hyper-efficient and time-determined economies we currently have to live with.